So the other day I was clicking through my newsreader program, looking at the video game news, and something struck me. The fact that for the 50, 60, 70 articles that I was scrolling through, I would say about 90% of them were essentially sales copy. These articles were telling me nothing about the video game industry beyond what I can buy now or what I can buy in a couple of weeks. Clickbaity titles, very, very light on content. And it sort of brought up a point, or at least reminded me of a point that I've wanted to make on the channel for a while, and that is to ask the question, to what degree are video game reviews still relevant? Now, when I was growing up, and you could see this here in the thumbnail, I would read things like GamePro and EGM, and yeah, those were essentially sales outlets. They were, they had tons of ads, they had writers who didn't go into great detail about these games, but in a pre-internet era, this was a source where you could turn to, especially if you got a couple of these magazines, and you could kind of get an objective, well, no, I'm not going to say objective, but you could get at least an evaluative assessment of certain popular games and get an idea of what games were out there. And yeah, they sort of gave big write-ups to some duds, but by and large, it was one of the only outlets of information, and it did a fair job. This industry did a fair job, in my opinion. You fast forward until today, and you've lost the ability to make that evaluative assessment, or better stated, the corporations, the big developers and publishers have captured the very act of making an independent evaluation of their work. And they've done that in a couple ways. I mean, beyond, I'm not talking about Let's Players and streamers, which I think is now the mechanism by which you can really determine is a game for you. You watch a couple of minutes of gameplay and you have an idea. But beyond that, when you get to the reviews, you have essentially out there on the internet, especially here on YouTube, two types of reviews. You have the paid review, and I'm going to suggest that there are more paid reviews than we realize. Obviously, we had the thing with Microsoft where they were offering money to certain big YouTubers to talk up a couple of their titles. That's probably a story that's 3 or 4 years old now, and they were called on it. But if you get a copy of a game for free, if the publisher says, hey, I want to just send you this code, check out our game, that's a paid review because they're giving you a financial advantage in terms of early access, the ability to get your video out there and earn money before a lot of the other reviewers. So it's not a financial transaction per se, but it is very much a paid review. And if that happens, you really can't, as a consumer who wants to have a non-biased evaluation, those reviews don't help. Because if I'm one of those guys or gals who gets these free games, if my economic viability as a channel is tied to the access I get from these publishers, how can I possibly be objective? And yeah, you may overlook that. You may like their personality. They're quirky. They like the types of games that you like. So be it. But it is not a fair evaluative assessment of a particular game. And it seems like, on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have the second type of review, which is the technical analysis. And I think the guys over at Digital Foundry are the best example of this. I mean, I like what they do. They have great production value. They have a level of technical sophistication in how they assess these games, how they analyze these games. And I think it's immensely interesting on a certain level. But as impressive as it is in its execution, it doesn't really, their reviews really don't tell me anything. Their analysis remains purely on the technical level, and they don't give me a lot of information about the overall quality of the game. Yes, they can gleefully wax poetic about the complexity of a shadow in 4 different versions of Metal Gear Online, and it's all well and good, but I don't really know that much about the game. They ultimately have this very elaborate system of pointing out very minute visual features of a game that you may not even notice in your playthrough. And so while they answer the question, dude, which game has the best graphics, that you got a lot in the GamePro and EGM era, they tell me, they have really nothing to say about a game as a product or a game as an investment of time. And when you have that dichotomy, when you only have those two options, for all the videos that you may watch, and I watch a lot of videos on YouTube simply because it's just how I spend my time in the morning, or rather look at that than the grim news these days, I'm not really learning anything about these titles. And so it begs the question, what value does a review have? Should we even label videos as reviews in this current economic climate online? And even beyond that, we have to ask the question, what is left for video game journalism? What can video game journalists actually accomplish rather than being just an underpaid advertising arm, kind of in the gig economy kind of way for the video game industry? I mean, all they seem to produce is blog-style clickbait. Now, I've said this before on one of my podcasts, back when I was doing that, and that is, there is an answer. There is an alternative to this. I think if we really care about independent evaluation of video games, we need something like a Consumer Reports style outlet for the video game industry that independently assesses games based on certain normative assumptions about what's valuable to a player. So let me talk about what that would mean. I don't know if you're familiar with Consumer Reports. It's, they review cars, they review a whole bunch of stuff that, big ticket items that you would buy for your home. And they are completely independent. They're not advertiser supported. You have to subscribe to them, and you get access to their reviews. And if you look at their car reviews, they have certain assumptions that they make. They say that, well, we feel that all car buyers, whether you're buying an $80,000 car or an $18,000 car, you want reliability. I'm not going to go into their whole set of metrics for evaluating a car, but that's an example. Not everyone might care about reliability. Maybe you just want a cool car and you're going to lease it. You don't care what happens to it after mile 40,000. But I think it's a fair assumption. And so we need to make those assumptions for the video game industry in an organization that is completely independent. They buy games off the shelf, or they download them from these services on launch day, no contact with developers whatsoever, and they produce an independent evaluation. I think that's pretty much the only way to go about it. Now, perhaps in another video I'll sit down and I'll think about what those normative assumptions might be and how that might work, but I'm not going to do that here. I don't have the time this evening. The only question that I think we have to ask is, even if we had that, would it work in the current climate? And I think the economic model of the internet makes it very hard. It's a clickbait-driven internet. And if that Consumer Report-style organization is not there on day one, maybe it's going to take them 2 weeks to go through something like Monster Hunter, to go through, an 80-hour RPG. Will anyone care about their opinion once it's released? And I think that connects to the other problem, is that the player base, the consumer base, is in a lot of ways already conditioned not to respond to critical analysis. It seems like a lot of people today, they want the quick fix, they want the quick take, and they'll go out and drop their money on anything out there, and maybe after they buy, say, for example, Star Wars Battlefront 2, and they realize that they've purchased a $60 digital slot machine, they're pissed off and they'll rage on Reddit or whatever the case might be. But I don't know that the player base really cares to wait or cares about an in-depth analysis. So it's a problem that we have to deal with, I think, or it's a problem that at least I face as someone who, despite the fact that I've disconnected a little bit from buying every release these days, I still care to a degree to see what's out there and maybe find a game that I didn't think I would like, but that nonetheless is interesting, or that gets a couple of great reviews and I'd really like to go pick it up. I can't trust that anymore. So as a result, I'm just buying less games and playing less new games. I don't think in the end that's very good for the industry.